She paid $500 for an abandoned dairy barn in the middle of Montana. Just wanted a quiet place to fix engines. But what this female mechanic found beneath the floorboards was anything but quiet. A secret WWII tunnel, sealed for over 80 years. Forgotten letters. A soldier declared dead. And a love story that history never got to finish. This isn't just a barn. And she's not just any mechanic girl. Stay with us because the truth she uncovered will leave you breathless. And the way it ends, you'll never forget her name. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. You ever get that feeling, that itch in your gut you just can't explain? That's what it was for Samantha Sam Walker, a 27-year-old mechanic from a nowhere town called Maple Hollow, Montana. Sam wasn't the kind of girl to chase butterflies or listen to fairy tales. She liked spark plugs, steel, and the smell of diesel at 6A. But on a cloudy Tuesday morning, she saw something that made her heart pause. It was listed on the back page of the county auction flyer, abandoned dairy barn, as is, $500 minimum. Most folks would have laughed, thrown the paper away. But Sam, she circled it in red. She didn't even know why. When she pulled up to see the place, it looked worse than the photos. The roof sagged like a tired spine. One side of the barn leaned like it had given up decades ago, and the paint had long surrendered to wind and time. But there was something about it, something she couldn't shake. Everyone told her she was crazy. "You're throwing money into rot," said Mr. Halverson from the repair shop. Even her mom just shook her head and muttered, "Baby, dreams don't grow in dead places." But Sam didn't argue. She signed the papers and handed over $500 in cash. She wasn't sure what she had just bought, but deep down, something in that barn was calling her. She didn't know yet that the wind whispering through the slats carried secrets from a war long buried. She didn't know the cracked concrete floor hid more than just dust and cow dung. She just thought she was buying space to fix old engines. But in truth, she had just stepped into a story that hadn't been told in over 80 years. The first few weeks, Sam didn't do much with the barn, just swept out hay, patched up parts of the roof, and tried not to inhale too much mold. The place was stubborn. Every time she fixed something, another board cracked or a nail gave up. It was like the barn was resisting her touch. But she didn't give up. That wasn't her style. She'd show up every morning with her old toolbox and a thermos of black coffee, dragging a work light and a radio that only played one station. Just her, the tools, and the echo of a place that hadn't been touched in decades. But one morning early April, the snow barely melted. Sam was dragging a rusted shelf across the back of the barn when she heard something strange. A thud, then a thump. But not the shelf, beneath it. She froze, tapped her boot against the wooden floor again. "Hollow." She frowned, bent down, knocked with her knuckles. Definitely hollow. The floor in that corner felt wrong, too soft, too echoey. Sam had pulled apart enough truck beds and floorboards to know the sound of a false panel. This wasn't just rotting wood, it was something under it. The next few hours were a blur of adrenaline and dust. She grabbed her crowbar, flashlight, and a flathead screwdriver. The floor gave more resistance than expected. Rusted nails bent, boards snapped, mice scattered. Then it opened. Not a hatch, not a trap door, a sinkhole. At least, that's what it looked like. About 3 feet wide, deep, black. Cold air breathed up from it like the earth itself was exhaling. Sam sat back on her heels, heart thudding. The space was lined with bricks, intentional masonry, not erosion. She grabbed her flashlight and pointed it down the hole. There was a ladder. Metal. Runged. Bolted into the side. What the hell? She hesitated. Who wouldn't? Then she lowered herself down. The air hit her first damp, heavy, like wet iron and old smoke. Then the silence. A thick, muffled silence that made her ears feel too loud. She counted each step as she descended, gripping the cold metal of the ladder. 27 rungs. Then her boots hit concrete. She stood in a narrow tunnel, no wider than her outstretched arms. Brick walls, arched ceiling. Rusted metal piping ran along one side, and someone decades ago had strung ancient electrical wiring that crumbled when she touched it. Her flashlight flicked across the wall. Stenciled letters, in black paint, still visible. No exit without command. Her breath caught. This wasn't just an old root cellar. This was military. The air was so still it felt unnatural. She walked forward slowly, the tunnel stretching beyond the beam of her flashlight. Her boots echoed. Her breathing got louder. The tunnel bent slightly to the left, then opened into a small room. She froze. Inside the room was a cot, rusted but still intact. A desk, with papers turned to powder, an old tin cup, still upright, a canteen, an oil lamp, and in the corner, a wooden crate stamped with a faded insignia. U.S. Army Air Forces, 1943. She stared at it for a long time. Then she sat on the cot, dust billowing around her, and tried to make sense of what she'd found. She wasn't a historian. She fixed trucks. She wasn't trained to understand this kind of thing. But she knew enough to realize this wasn't some farmer's hideout or a teenager's prank. This place had been built, sealed, and forgotten on purpose. Sam didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small trailer beside the barn, staring at the ceiling, the flashlight on the pillow next to her. Her hands were still dirty, her mind spinning. Why was there a military tunnel under an old dairy barn? Why had no one said anything about it? Why her? But beneath the questions, something else grew, something steadier than fear. Responsibility. She had touched something that had been hidden for over 80 years. Something someone had worked hard to forget or protect. And now, it was hers. Or maybe it never was. Maybe she was just the one who was finally meant to find it. The next morning, the barn looked the same. Same sagging roof, same peeling wood. But Sam felt different, like something inside her had been unlocked, just like that tunnel. And no matter how much she wanted to pretend she'd just stumbled into some historical oddity, she knew it was more than that. She skipped her usual coffee, went straight back to the hole, down the ladder, 27 rungs, same heavy air. She moved slowly this time, taking in details the way the bricks had been laid by hand, the faint scorch marks near the entrance of the tunnel, as if something had once burned here. Someone had lived in this place, not for a night, for weeks, maybe months. Sam crouched next to the crate. The insignia was barely visible under the dust. F.S. Army Air Forces, property of T. Arturm. Kt. Walters. She hesitated. The crate wasn't locked, but the lid was swollen from time and damp. She wedged her crowbar under one edge and lifted slowly. Inside was a memory. That's the only way she could describe it. Not weapons, not rations, not tools. Letters. Bundles of them. Yellowed. Curled. Tied with twine. Sam reached for one, her fingers trembling. The envelope was brittle, but the ink had held. My dearest Rose, it began. The snow's fallen hard this week, but I'm warm, not from blankets, from the thought of you. Sam swallowed hard. These weren't military orders or reports. These were love letters, written from this very place, a secret station beneath a dairy barn, turned into a sanctuary for a soldier in hiding. She opened another, and another. One detailed a near escape from enemy fire. Another spoke of a top-secret mission gone wrong. One letter had a water stain she swore looked like a teardrop. Each letter built the story of Thomas H. Walter's a pilot who'd gone missing in 1944. His name wasn't famous. Not in books, not in records Sam could remember. But he'd been real. And this tunnel, it was his hiding place, his last station, maybe even his grave, on the desk beside the cot. She found something else, a faded black and white photo, bent at the corners. A young man in uniform, standing beside a small plane, and next to him, a woman hair pinned up, smiling like the war couldn't touch her. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the letters, Rose and me, before I left London. June to 43. Sam stared at their faces. Somehow, they felt closer to her than some of the people she saw every day in Maple Hollow. But something still didn't make sense. Why here? Why hide in Montana? Why beneath a barn that nobody seemed to care about? She took the letters back up to her trailer that night, wrapped in an old towel like they were holy. And maybe they were. She called the library, asked about war records, looked through digital archives. She even reached out to a local veterans museum. No one had ever heard of Thomas H. Walters, but the coordinates she gave them, those matched something. During World War II, there had been whispers of unofficial safe houses in rural America, places where injured airmen were secretly evacuated, smuggled out of Europe, and hidden while intelligence decided what to do with them. All off the record, all invisible. It was risky, illegal, even, but it happened. And someone in this town had made it possible. Someone had hidden Thomas, fed him, gave him this space, and maybe kept his secret for the rest of their life. Sam sat on the edge of her cot that night, holding one of the letters. It didn't feel like an accident anymore. She wasn't just someone who happened to buy the barn. She wasn't just another mechanic with a crowbar and curiosity. She was the first person in nearly 80 years to read this man's story, to hear his voice, to carry his memory forward. She wiped the dust from her jeans, stood up, and walked back out to the barn one last time before bed. The stars were clear above Maple Hollow, the wind was still, and beneath her boots, the echoes of a forgotten war stirred again. Sam had always been more comfortable with engines than with people, but ever since finding that tunnel and those letters, she found herself doing something she never expected, asking questions, talking to neighbors, showing up at the local library, browsing dusty military archives on a slow old laptop, squinting at names she couldn't pronounce and missions she didn't understand. But something in her had shifted. She couldn't look away. It was a week after she opened the crate that she decided to knock on the door of Mr. Albert Finch, the oldest living man in Maple Hollow. He was 97, mostly blind, but his memory was as sharp as fresh-cut barbed wire. He had lived in the town since 1930. That meant he was 13 when World War II began, and 20 when it ended. A teenager during those years and old enough to remember everything people thought he'd forget. Sam brought the photo of Thomas and Rose. No names, no hints. She just slid it across the table, between the 2 cups of chamomile tea his nurse had brewed. Albert held the photo close to his face, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't speak for a while. Then he whispered, "Well, I'll be damned." Turns out, he remembered. Not the soldier's name, but the face, the uniform, the whispers. Back in 44, Albert said, My daddy delivered milk to that barn before the dairy shut down. Said the new owner never came out, just left a note and cash in the box at the gate. But one morning, he heard something strange from the back. Sounded like coughing and jazz music. Jazz, during the war, in a barn. Sam leaned forward. Albert sipped his tea, his voice lowering. A week later, we heard there was a train that passed through town without stopping, only slowed down. Late at night. No lights, no whistle. Folks said it was carrying government cargo. Then that barn just got boarded up. Everyone assumed the place was haunted after that. He chuckled, then stopped. I don't think it was haunted. I think someone hid a man in there. And we were all too scared or too proud to ask why. Sam thanked him, left the photo with him. On the drive back to the barn, the town looked different, not newer, not older, just deeper, like it had been keeping this secret for decades, waiting for someone quiet enough to listen. Back at her trailer, she started researching Thomas H. Walters again. The letters had dates, places, mentions of people named Jack, Mooney, and Captain Rell. She cross-referenced everything she could find, emailing history forums, talking to archivists, even posting on a subreddit for WWII historians. And after 3 days, she got a reply. A woman named Clara Wilson, a retired librarian in Boston, had access to a collection of wartime correspondence not digitized yet. She searched the name Thomas H. Walters. One hit. A pilot. Flew recon missions over Belgium. Declared MIA missing in action on January 6, 1944. Officially presumed dead. No remains ever found. Except he wasn't dead. He'd somehow made it out, and ended up beneath a dairy barn in Montana, writing letters to the woman he loved. Sam went back down the tunnel that night, not out of curiosity this time, but with reverence. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the chamber, the photo of Thomas and Rose in her lap, and one of his letters in her hand. I hear coyotes at night, but they don't scare me, not like silence does. I keep thinking about your kitchen, that one drawer that always stuck. If I ever make it home, I'm gonna fix it. Not with tools, just with time. Sam felt her eyes sting. This wasn't just a story from the past. It was a life paused mid-sentence. A love that had outlived its author. And somehow, it had landed in her hands. A few days later, she did something she never thought she'd do. She called the local paper, told them everything. Not for attention, not to be famous, but because this wasn't her secret anymore. It had been buried long enough. The article came out with the headline, "Mechanic Discovers WWII Tunnel Under Local Barn," with letters that rewrite history. Within a week, reporters came. Veterans groups emailed. Historians offered to help identify the items in the tunnel. A small museum in Billings asked if she'd consider an exhibit. Sam didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. For now, she just wanted to finish reading the letters. All 37 of them. Because Thomas Walters may have been forgotten by the world. But to one quiet girl in Maple Hollow, his voice had come back to life. The thing about secrets is, once they're out, they don't go back in. Within 2 weeks, the old barn that once sat alone in the outskirts of Maple Hollow became the quiet center of something bigger. A place once full of silence was now filled with curiosity, reverence, and purpose. But Sam never planned to turn it into a spectacle. No ticket booths, no camera crews trampling through the tunnel. That's not what Thomas H. Walters would have wanted. And honestly, it's not what she wanted either. What she wanted was truth, and maybe a way to give it a voice. It started with a bench. She built it herself out of reclaimed barnwood and an old tractor axle, placed it outside the barn under the only surviving window pane, right where the sunlight came through in the late afternoon. Then she cleaned the tunnel, carefully, gently, like she was dusting off someone's memory. Every cot, every brick, every pipe. She laminated the letters, numbered each one, left a copy of the photo of Thomas and Rose near the cot in a plastic frame. Not so visitors would stare, but so they'd remember he was real. Then she made a sign. In 1944, a pilot disappeared. In 2025, his story was found. This is not a war story. This is a love story. Please enter with respect. The townspeople came one by one. Old farmers, teachers, kids on bikes, veterans in wheelchairs who wiped tears they thought were long dried. One woman brought an old compass, said it belonged to her grandfather. He was stationed out west. She whispered, never said much. But once, he mentioned a barn. A local history teacher asked if she could bring her students. Sam said yes, but only 10 at a time. Quietly. No selfies. No shouting. Only listening. And they did. The barn that once echoed only with wind now held the soft hum of voices reading aloud Thomas's letters. One by one. Each time someone finished, they folded the page slowly, like closing a chapter of someone else's life with care. Then came the email. A man in upstate New York said he was Rose's grandson. His name was Daniel Hart. He'd stumbled upon the article by accident, doing a Google search on his grandmother's name. Said she passed away in 1998, never remarried after her fiancé went missing during the war. His hands shook when he arrived. Sam watched as he descended the ladder slowly, pausing every few steps, gripping the rungs like they carried the weight of generations. He sat on the cot and read every single letter, cried openly. Then he pulled a chain from his neck, a thin silver necklace with a ring on it. She wore it until the day she died. He said she never got closure, never knew what happened. Always wondered if maybe, just maybe, he found peace somewhere. Sam didn't say anything. She just nodded, and they sat together in that underground stillness for a long, long time. A few weeks later, Daniel returned with boxes. Photos, letters, her journals, even a lock of hair tied in a yellowed ribbon. Together, they created a tiny exhibit in the barn loft. Rose's story, Thomas's letters. 2 lives divided by war, reunited by fate. A small wooden plaque now hangs over the barn door. The Walters Tunnel, discovered 2025. For those who wait. For those who never stopped loving. Sam never imagined herself as a museum curator. She still fixed trucks, still smelled like motor oil, still kept to herself more often than not. But something inside her had changed. The girl who once bought a barn to chase silence now protected the voices of the past. One evening, just before sunset, she sat on the bench outside the barn, watching the golden light slant through the cracks. She opened her notebook not to sketch a new carburetor or jot down part numbers, but to start writing a training program for local girls who wanted to learn mechanics. I thought I was meant to restore engines, she wrote, but maybe I was meant to restore stories. Because what she learned deep under the earth, in a forgotten room built by hands long gone, is that you don't need to be a soldier to carry legacy. Sometimes all it takes is listening. Anyone can preserve history if they care enough to listen. As the sun dipped behind the hills of Maple Hollow, Samantha Walker didn't just close the barn door, she opened a chapter for those long silenced. That tunnel wasn't just brick and dust. It was a heartbeat, a whisper across time, a secret kept for decades, waiting for someone quiet, kind, and persistent enough to hear it. And now that story lives again in every letter read aloud, in every person who walks through that door and feels something stir. Because this isn't just about war, it's about love that outlasted gunfire, about truth that refused to stay buried, and about a mechanic girl who thought she was fixing an old building, but ended up restoring a legacy. For Samantha and for us all, the past isn't behind us. It's beneath us, waiting to be found and remembered. Up next, 2 more incredible stories that prove how a single choice can echo through time. Click now to keep the journey going, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to subscribe